As a junior doctor, it's not particularly easy to get a job in a metro location. I think the most important thing when you're a junior doctor coming from overseas to Australia is to remember that you need to be realistic about finding positions. The first one's always the hardest, but once you get your foot in the door and you get your general registration, you will be able to move to more metro locations, but the first job you really need to be open about going to more regional centres because that's where the jobs really are. But I also think what's really important to remember is that these regional centres aren't just nowhere towns plotted in the middle of nowhere. That they're regional centres with large population and a lot of things going on. There's a huge nightlife in these centres. There's unbelievable resources at your fingertips really, and a lot of the time they're not a long drive away from a major city, so that is at your hands as well. No, although they're comparable health systems, the registration is completely different. So in Australia you've got the Medical Board of Australia, in New Zealand you've got the Medical Council of New Zealand, so registration and requirements are completely different for that. Both organisations tend to get overwhelmed by applications in August because that's when most of the UK doctors are coming over. So I think that's one thing to think about. If you could maybe think about coming over slightly different time, changing your time frame, that would really help your chances at getting a position. So a principal house officer position is quite similar to a registrar position, but they do have their differences. The registrar position is accredited with the college and the principal house officer position is not. Registrar positions can start at around the PGY3 mark, but obviously the more experience you have, the better chances you have. So anywhere from PGY3 and onwards, you've got a great chance of getting a registrar position.
Recently, over recent years, the market has become incredibly competitive in Australia. The number of specialists that the colleges are producing far exceeds the number of jobs that are available. So what used to be a steady stream for British, Irish, American, Canadian trained doctors to come and work here as specialists, that has largely dried up, so it's harder and harder to find jobs. We're finding that there are more regional opportunities available, and the regional centres in Australia offer a fantastic way of life, cheap accommodation, great weather, close communities, and it's something that the doctors that we've relocated to these areas have given us incredibly positive feedback for. There are differences in specialties, particularly anaesthetics is tight at the minute. There are very few anaesthetic jobs available anywhere in the country and almost no area of need jobs. In other specialties such as general medicine, internal medicine, there are still a number of opportunities available. The other alternative is to look at opportunities in New Zealand. They are slightly more accessible, particularly for radiologists. There's a huge need for radiologists in New Zealand, and we would be delighted to help you source your ideal job.
I think what you can do is to communicate who you are clinically and personally through your resume. You would do that by providing lots of detail about your current role, your responsibilities, your clinical skills and expertise. And you would ensure that the person understands the setting in which you're working as well, so that they can identify how well does where you match now fit with their requirements and their location in their department. I think the other thing you can do is to have references at an earlier stage as possible. And sometimes people are very concerned about telling people that they work with, or indeed their supervisor, of their plans. But one of the ways in which you can get around this is you may have someone who's recently left the organisation that you're currently at, and they will have no sense of conflict usually about providing you a reference. So that can be a good starting point.
This is a vital part of the recruitment process, so we spend quite a bit of time with you. First of all, we'll give you our preparation for interview document that will highlight a lot of the questions on subject areas that we feel were likely to come up. We've built up this document over many years because of the feedback that we've been given from other candidates, so it's a very useful piece of work. If you would like to have a more detailed discussion, you can have that with one of the medical recruitment team, or there is also the opportunity to have a discussion with our medical director, who is himself a consultant anaesthetist working here in Australia, and he's prepared surgeons, anaesthetists, psychiatrists to help them prepare, because it's really about the types of questions that you get asked. I mean, the clinical questions you'll have covered, but the more specific Australian healthcare questions we can help you with.
There are restrictions on where you can work being an internationally trained specialist that are imposed by the federal government, and that applies to all internationally trained specialists. The plan is to have you work at a regional centre or any other location where there's not so much competition for a role. Spend that time gaining your Australasian fellowship, and then you'll be in a competitive chance in the marketplace to gain that second step to a tertiary centre. One of the great things about New Zealand as a location is that it doesn't have those imposed restrictions, that all jobs are truly competitive. You'll always be a little bit behind the eight ball because you don't have Australasian fellowship, but if your skills and expertise are an excellent match for that job, if you are the best candidate for the role, there's a high chance you could be working in a major metropolitan tertiary centre. 12 months is not possible in Australia because there isn't a registration category that is suitable to that short period of time. New Zealand, however, is a very realistic option, and it's quite common for doctors to go to New Zealand for that period of time. The employers are familiar with that, they're very comfortable with that. As long as you have the skills and expertise, you may well be seriously considered for a role on that basis.
The Area of Need pathway used to be a great pathway for particularly UK, Irish, Canadian and American trained doctors. But unfortunately, with the large increase of Australian trained fellows, this pathway is less accessible, as clients are finding that when they advertise, they are getting Australian trained fellows to apply. What we find is that with the specialist assessment that's already been completed, the client can then see a direct route to fellowship for the candidate, for you as a candidate, and they can see that this is a very easy process. They may supplement that with an area of need application on top to get you through a little bit quicker, but if you've got that guaranteed outcome, then the client's able to see that they've got a long-term fellow. They understand that you're committed and that you have a route to fellowship.
Our team works all the time speaking to clients throughout Australia and to New Zealand. Once we've identified a realistic role, we put that up into our system, and that will be emailed to you as long as you have registered with our MediJob Mail system. If you haven't already done that, go to the website, click on the big red button, and you'll be right. Payment depends on the location of the job. Each state and territory in Australia has their own award. Any opportunity should be considered mainly in terms of the clinical suitability for you, whether it meets the registration and supervision requirements that you will have, and the quality of life that's there for you and your family. I would say the same thing about New Zealand. The New Zealand salaries are based on a national award. They are equivalent, if not sometimes more, than some of the lesser paying states in Australia. And I think that's something that lots of candidates don't really understand. Once again, it should be on clinical suitability, supervision, registration and lifestyle for your family should be your main points of difference, I think.